What is going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where today we are going to unpack all the action from Gather Round with another installment of the round recap. If you are new around these parts, I'll run down what it is, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory at this point. The round recap is a video podcast style video where we look over the previous round of AFL football, deep dive into every single game, before dishing out my votes for the MVP award for the 2025 season and announcing my team of the week for that given round. And I think I've actually turned my tune a little bit when it comes to Gather Round. Last year, I was on board with the idea, but I didn't really like the idea that they had deep-rooted themselves into South Australia for X amount of years. I thought it was something that, outside of Victoria, they could really grow if we moved Gather Round to different locations. I really feel a Western Australia Gather Round would be huge. Going to places like Sydney and to the Gold Coast, Queensland, would, expand it a little bit more, given that, New South Wales and Queensland, they're trying to target within that opening round kind of thing. But if we had a Gather Round where everybody played in those particular states, it kind of takes that round zero bullshit out of the way. And I went into this year open-minded with Gather Round because last year it was a spectacle, and I thought it was going to be a slow build, something that people would get on with over time. But this year they really amped it up. That first night with Adelaide taking on Geelong, and they had the laser show to kick off the night, and it was just a huge spectacle. It had a very grand final-esque feel about it all, and collectively over the round, over the weekend, you saw big numbers coming in for non-South Australian teams. I can't remember what game it was, but there was over 40,000 for this one particular game within Adelaide Oval. I think it was it the Bulldogs game? No, Bulldogs wasn't played at Adelaide. We'll work it out when the time comes. When we go through the round, it'll click. I'll remember where it was at. But just to see big crowds coming and forming for non-South Australian teams and just getting around Gather Round as a whole really confirmed to myself that this is a good move. And to see it grow rather exponentially from last year to this year shows that they're on an upward trajectory that's going to continue taking Gather Round to a new level each and every time. And whether that be involving maybe some local artists to do live performances, I don't know what happens outside of the games. I know there's things for families to do and stuff around the local kind of areas. They really embellish on that and make sure that it is a round that can be celebrated not just on field and in the stands, but off field as well. But I think they can add more to it. Have some live performances during the games, like post-game, pre-game, in the middle half-time. I think that will take it to a new level. The matchups could be, I feel, a little bit better, and we now have teams putting in bids that want to play at certain grounds. It's already come through that GWS are already putting in a petition to play at the Barossa next year, which I think would be great for them. And to see clubs really taking this round on board and actually expressing interest in wanting to play at certain grounds and really spread their wings in that essence, I feel it's great. This round was a great round, and not just because it was Gather Round, but we had all teams playing, every single team, no bye bullshit. It was a great weekend of football. I mean, there were some outcomes that were a little bit egregious, and some people might not have been happy with how their teams might have performed, but overall, from start to finish, I think this round was a success. It all kicked off on Thursday night, as I mentioned, with Adelaide taking on Geelong, in a game that I honestly thought Adelaide could not have fumbled. The hot start that they ran out to, I thought to myself, they could be the real deal here. I mentioned it in my latest SUPERCOACH video that I'm a little bit uncertain, because now that I've looked at the teams that Adelaide have played against coming up to this point in time, we haven't seen how all of these breakout stars that they've gotten, how the young kids are really coming through the system really well. We haven't seen them tried against a true contender yet. And although St Kilda are building something, and although Essendon haven't been far off the mark in their games, I still feel coming up against Geelong was their tallest order up until this point in time. So heading into this game with a 1-point defeat, obviously the week prior to the Gold Coast, chip on the shoulder, at home, thought they would bounce back. And when they ran out to that huge lead to start the game, I thought, fuck, here we go. They're on here. They're the real deal. They're someone that we can truly get behind. I've been rallying behind Adelaide the last couple of years, saying that they're a true dark horse because when they find consistency and continuity in their game, they're very hard to stop. As a neutral supporter watching all games over a weekend of football, Adelaide are an exciting team to watch for me, and I didn't think I'd ever say that about Adelaide. But the drop-off in this game was so huge. At one point, they were between 30 to 40 points clear, and I thought to myself, this is going to be a game that they're going to absolutely run out. Geelong started clawing their way back in. Adelaide got themselves to a point during the second term that I thought it was going to just become a insurmountable amount for Geelong to come back, but they managed to stem the flow back, and by half-time they only went in with a 12-point lead, and I thought, okay, Geelong can really wrestle back momentum here. And all that momentum Adelaide had built in that first half of football went out with the water in the bath. You know what I'm trying to say, the baby in the bath water. You know that analogy? I'm stumbling over it, but that's what I'm trying to say. They threw not only the water in the baby, they threw the fucking bathtub. See, I'm still stumbling, just like fucking Adelaide did. How's that ironically coming across to you guys at home? But Adelaide were just a completely different team in the second half, and Geelong managed to get themselves in a position to well and truly strike. It was only 8 points the way of Adelaide heading into the final term, and we all know Geelong are one of those teams that never lay down. You can always expect a little bit of fight. Even in games where they lose by the end of it, they will always throw punches until that bell is rang. And that is what they did. They went down swinging, and they swung hard, because Adelaide only managed to muster themselves the one goal in the final term, comparatively to Geelong, who went on to kick 5 goals 3. They just lit it up, and it was on the back of performances like from Dangerfield and from Cameron, 2 senior heads, hitting the scoreboard, wrestling that momentum back, and having... It's a very interesting watch, because they had another player, they had Tom Stewart out sick prior to the game, and I've noticed Geelong have a habit, especially this year, of announcing incredibly late that there's going to be players out, and it always seems to be a particular role player that's missing. Almost like they announce their team, the build-up comes, the opposition obviously plans for it, and then at the last minute Geelong's like, nah, they're not playing, we're bringing this person in. It throws a little bit of disarray into the mix, and I do feel Geelong are exploiting that. But then again, we're talking about a club that historically has gotten away with a lot of shit with the AFL, so I don't expect anything to come from it. But Geelong missing a figurehead like Tom Stewart, I honestly thought, Walker and Thilthorpe and Fogarty, they would get off the chain. And Walker early in this game was popping off. I thought, fuck, this is going to be a game Walker kicks like 5 or 6 goals. And Thilthorpe has been an absolute monster in front of goal. Struggled. And Fogarty, comparatively to previous weeks, struggled a little bit. It was very interesting. It just, the drop-off was huge. I honestly thought Adelaide were in a position during this game where Geelong were just not going to be able to catch up. And Adelaide, if they had won this game, would have confirmed or at least cemented a little less doubt into people's heads that they can get the job done. But now question marks start to arise as to whether they're frauds, and they're only going to knock off teams that are going to be thereabout but not playing finals this year, and they're hoping they're going to skate on by. I think their hardest task before Geelong was the Gold Coast, and that was a game where obviously marred in controversy. We know they probably could have won that game had that mark been paid to Isaac Rankin late, but this was their toughest ask since. I still feel Geelong is probably tougher to take on than the Gold Coast comparatively, and yeah, Adelaide were just a shadow of themselves. It was a hard watch as an Adelaide fan, I can imagine. It was a hard watch as a neutral as well, because you want a good game of football, and this game in the end turned out to be a good game in the way that Geelong came back and won, but it was the tale of two tapes. It was Adelaide in the first half, it was Geelong in the second half. Pick and choose which one you liked more. Ultimately, Geelong just flipped the switch, and they ran out the game winners, and they just further cement themselves as a serious premiership threat this year. I had them taking on Carlton in the grand final and coming runners up, but given the circumstances here, they could very well be heading into a grand final this year with one hand on that cup already, with how well and comprehensively they're playing, given some holes in their structure. They're just finding a way, and it's through these young kids that are coming up through the ranks. It's through the trades they've done to get these recruits in. Geelong just keep finding ways, and a lot of people think it's unfair, and I'm probably on board with that. Thursday night might have been a tale of the tapes. Friday night was a one-legged race where the opposition literally had no legs and was at a complete disadvantage because Collingwood jumped out of the gates like Maccabi Diva and just ran all the way home without any competition whatsoever. You could make excuses for Sydney, missing some key players. Obviously, not having Tom Papley up forward is going to hinder them because Tom Papley, he gets up and about. He thrives off of that energy. Logan McDonald, missing component in that forward line. They're having to throw Tom McCartan forward. It kind of throws their structure out defensively. Errol Goulden, obviously the biggest out for Sydney, but then comparatively, Collingwood have players missing as well. So I don't know how long you can stretch the injury concerns for both teams. Probably now you can a little bit more because Sydney did have Joel Amati go down with a hamstring injury in this game. So that throws their forward structure completely out of whack, and it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out moving forward for Sydney in that retrospect. But this game here came in as potentially one of the better matchups of the round, and Collingwood just whitewashed them from start to finish. It wasn't even that big of a contest outside of probably the first quarter. I feel the first quarter was a genuine arm wrestle. 2 points away of Collingwood. I thought, yep, we're on here. We're going to have a great game of footy on our hands. Moved on to half-time, and that lead extended to 17 points, and I thought, it's okay, Sydney can come back. This is still promising to be a good build-up, and Collingwood just put the foot down, and it was see you later, no worries at all. Again, really, maybe the way you look at it, it could be the tale of two tapes again, because it was a competitive first half, and then Collingwood just put the foot down and ran the game out, and we don't know whether that could be potentially to Sydney having a lot of youth running through their team now, so young kids are obviously going to burn out a lot more, but you could expect a lot better from senior heads at Sydney, and some of the players that we've come to be those players to be relied upon struggled. I mean, Matt Roberts in defence, I feel, is one of the more underrated defenders in the competition, and just couldn't get out of the gates. He was very stagnant in the way he played. Riley Bice over the last couple of weeks has been Sydney's better defender, and he's only played a handful of games himself, so it kind of puts into perspective where Sydney are at collectively, and this is a team that only played in a grand final most recently, so we have come to expect a lot better from Sydney, and I feel that putting them on a pedestal and expecting more given how we've seen them perform in recent years kind of puts them at a little bit of an unfair advantage, I feel. But when you expect so much from a team and they deliver so little, I feel it's a very precarious position to be in. I mean, a lot of people would have expected Sydney to do well this year. I did quite personally. I'm pretty sure I had them around the top four. But they're a well ways off to the best that we've seen Sydney get to, and it's only going to get worse now, as I said, with Joel Amati going down with that hamstring injury. We know Logan McDonald is suffering from injury. We know Tom Papley can't really get up and about because he's still in a fucking moon boot, so collectively, their forward line is completely fucked. I don't know what they're going to have to play Tom McCartan, who has been their best defender for years, out of full forward. They're going to have to rely on a young kid like Cleary to come through their system and perform well. On the flip side, Collingwood is starting to play themselves back into form, especially some of their individual talents. Nick Dacos ultimately and admittedly didn't start the powerhouse that we know he has been over previous years. He didn't start like that house on fire, but somebody grabbed some accelerant over the last couple of weeks and sped that fire up, and he's now running fucking hot. The last couple of weeks, he has been absolutely phenomenal, getting back to his best. And when Nick Dacos is at his best, Collingwood are at their best. There's no denying that connection. Young kids like Ben Long had the best game I've seen him play ever for his career, slowly starting to show the Collingwood faithful and neutral supporters that he has the ability to play at the level. Still sidebottom at his age, still managing to get the job done and, get around his teammates. Scott Pendlebury, same thing. Old as fuck, still manages to find a way to make things just look easy when he has ball in hand. The forward line is starting to find cohesiveness. Their back line is starting to find that cohesiveness again. Collingwood, I feel, are starting to become the threat that they know internally that they are, but we know as supporters that they are. We saw them win that grand final only a few years back, and they're getting, I feel, back to that position. I feel that they're really starting to gel things together. They're starting to get themselves back into a better place. Pieces are now starting to fit in the puzzle that they've been trying to throw together for the last couple of years, especially up forward. It's just everything's coming up Collingwood. It's a very daunting thing to think about, that Collingwood is starting to get back on track again when everybody just expected a bit of a drop-off. So if you're a Collingwood fan, you're probably getting a little bit more excited than you should be given the circumstances, but I think they're in striking distance. I think they've moved back up into the top 4 after this week, and it's a position that they're going to want to hold on to. They're going to want to relish, so expect them to come out swinging to keep that spot safe. Barossa Park on Saturday afternoon saw North Melbourne taking on the Gold Coast, and on paper you would have thought that this was going to be an absolute onslaught, especially given how well Gold Coast have been playing comparatively to how North Melbourne has been playing. We saw North Melbourne put a brilliant effort against Melbourne weeks back at Marvel Stadium, but since then they have dropped off and well off the pace, whereas the Gold Coast coming into this game with an undefeated streak, and it's hard to say that. It's the words coming out of my mouth, I don't believe them at times, but this game up until half time was an absolute belter, given the fact that Gold Coast only took an 8-point lead into that halftime break. It was really setting up to be what I potentially thought could have been one of the upsets of the year, given where both teams are at. North Melbourne, they had victory in the palm of their hands. They were so close, they could taste it. It was the tastiest hors d'oeuvre that they might have munched on for the entirety of the 2025 season, and that is including the win they had over Melbourne. And then unfortunately, it turned out that what they were eating was completely fucking rotten, and they're probably now getting, health and safety checks done on the restaurant and everything in between, because it just turned into an absolute landslide and they got squashed. I mean, 3/4 time, it balloons out to 19 points, and you start thinking, does North Melbourne have enough in the tank to really wrestle this momentum back? And there was plenty of times during that third quarter where they actually got in front. They had a lead. And then after that, it was one of the biggest drop-offs in a fourth quarter I think that we've seen all year. Going into that final term, 19-point differential, to then end up being on the receiving end of a 52-point loss is such a drop. And it started conversations now about whether or not Alistair Clarkson and his coaching should be looked at. Are we being a little bit too lenient on him because he's come into a club that has effectively been trying to rebuild? Are they making excuses because of the career that Alistair Clarkson has built as a coach? Has he become untouchable to some? And I know obviously there's been some circumstances in the past where he hasn't been untouchable, but I feel when it comes to discussions about coaches that are under the pump and need to fight to survive, I don't think Alistair Clarkson gets brought up in that conversation all too much. They're really in a position here, North Melbourne, where we should be seeing forward trajectory happening more often than not. And yes, I suppose you can argue up until 3/4 time, they had showed some forward movement, some progression, but to have that drop off to go from 19 to 52 in the final term, to allow the opposition in that final gap to come out and kick 7 goals 5 and only manage to kick 2 goals 3 for yourselves, I don't know. You start pointing fingers, you start throwing question marks about, and there's more question marks than there are answers at North Melbourne currently. I'm not sure where they're at. I am not. I thought they were going to be a team that would finish out of the bottom 4 this year, but they're really starting to put doubt in my mind that could be the case. They could very well still be a bottom 4 side this year, which obviously is great for me as a Richmond supporter because we have their number 1 pick locked up heading into the next draft. But as a neutral, I would have loved to have seen them get out of that bottom 4 mentality and physicality and just move forward. Whereas the Gold Coast continue this undefeated streak, and I've said it a couple of times in previous episodes of the round recap, when Hardwick went to the Gold Coast and made that comment that he's only a couple of pieces away from a premiership team, I, as well as many, laughed that off. And I think there's a lot of egg on our faces now because they've gone and done the recruiting that they need. They picked up Daniel Rioli off of halfback. They've got John Noble off of halfback. He's managed to move some pieces around collectively on the board. And Gold Coast, up until this point in time, have been one of the better looking teams all season. And saying that puts a sour taste in my mouth, but that's the reality we're currently living in. Gold Coast are undefeated, sitting in is it second place on the ladder? There might be a couple of teams ahead, maybe because they're on the same amount of points because of how the games are played out, because of the buys in the early rounds. But undefeated after round 5, I don't think even Gold Coast fans would have seen this one coming. The game that ended up having over 40,000 fans that I was alluding to earlier was the next game, Carlton West Coast. Now that I've seen the prompt on screen and I look at the scoreboard, it clicks to me that was the game. And to have 41,000+ fans for a Carlton West Coast game in Adelaide, that's huge to me. And that's just a part of what makes Gather Round, I feel, such a success. And moving forward, obviously, I think it's the next... Is it the next 7 years they locked in? I can't remember what the number was, but I'm very keen to see that progressively move forward. This game was interesting because Carlton obviously came into this game without a win. Similar with West Coast, one team was going to walk away with a win, one team was going to remain, without that first win. And everybody expected Carlton to get the job done. Richmond Gorringe, was so confident in this win that he said that if West Coast won, he was going to get Harley Reid giving the finger tattooed on his right bicep. And at that point in time, I think the whole of Australia wanted West Coast to win, because getting that tattoo would have been just icing on the cake to what Dan Gorringe has been delivering for us this year. But Carlton got it done, and got it done quite comfortably. 71 points, and this was with Charlie Curnow only kicking 2 goals for himself. This was with Harry Mackay in the opening moments of the game involved in an accidental head clash which saw him out for the game, and obviously with concussion rulings he misses the Good Friday. Is it Good Friday that they play next week? It might be. He misses whatever game he's playing for Easter weekend, he misses that game. So it was the first game Mackay and Curnow play together for the 2025 season, and one of them goes and gets concussed, and now he's going to miss next week. So it's a bit of a rolling meme so far with Carlton. But in that kind of absence of Mackay, and with Curnow not being able to hit the board in a big way, and trust me, we've seen outcomes from Curnow before where he's kicked, 6, 7, 8, 9 goals against teams like West Coast. Patrick Cripps goes and plays a predominant forward game and kicks 3 goals. Sam Walsh off of the wing and rolling through the midfield kicks 3 goals. If you had told me that the duo of Cripps and Walsh were going to kick more goals than the duo of Mackay and Curnow, I would have turned around and told you to get fucked and get your head checked. But that's the reality that we ended up living in. There was another injury that came out of this, and that was to Brody Kemp, who has suffered a lower leg injury. I think it's a calf, and he's been pretty elite in that forward line in the absence of either Mackay or Curnow at any given time. So you're taking 2 very potent pieces of that forward line puzzle for Carlton out of the equation, at least. Mackay for a week, Brody Kemp could be a little bit longer, so it's going to be interesting to see how they function forward of the ball. But when you've got the ability to play Patrick Cripps out of the forward line against a team where, let's face facts, I think Carlton came into this game knowing they were going to win quite comfortably, so being able to rest players and give players the opportunity to not just rest on the bench but go forward and kick a lazy 3 goals out of the forward line, and still Cripps finding a way outside of that 3 goals to still get other teammates on the board. It was a very selfless kind of team performance given the outcome. We had a debutant, or I don't know whether he was debuting, he could have already debuted, but he hadn't kicked a goal yet. He was still hunting for his first goal. Marks the ball, and instead of going back, just team thing, handballs the ball over the top to Paddy Cripps, who runs in and kicks a goal. He did thankfully go and kick his first goal in AFL football later that game. But just seeing little moments like that shows that Carlton, even though they hadn't won a game up until this point in time, the team is still rallying around each other, and the boys still want to see a united front, a collectiveness, and it worked. It just worked for them. This was a game, as I said, there was never really any position where I thought West Coast were going to threaten. 24-9 at quarter time. Carlton should have probably jumped out to a bigger lead, but after that they put the foot down. It was 53-24 at halftime. It was 81-36 at 3/4 time, then 121-50 again. West Coast only managing to put on a collective 26 points in the second half of football, whereas we have that 70-odd points, or close enough to 70-odd points scored in a second half. The second half, well, either way you look at it, both halves that Carlton played outscored what West Coast managed to do in a full game, which is incredible. Coming off of the back of a game where Jesse Hogan kicks more collectively than what West Coast did. It's not looking good for West Coast. And I said it last week, and I didn't say it to disparage any West Coast supporters, but I'm seriously now at a position where I look at the fixturing, and I might have given West Coast a little bit of a leeway, thinking, oh, their wins probably come against Richmond. And Richmond have been a little bit inconsistent this year, so you could still argue that fact. But we can seriously consider now going through a season where West Coast aren't going to get a win on the board at all. And now there's talks about them asking the AFL, or should they ask the AFL for assistance packages like North Melbourne have been given. I'm very anti, assistance packages at this point in time, because let's rewind it back a little bit, okay? I know it's been 7 years since the fact, but West Coast within the last 7 years has won a grand final. They had a team that could have gone on to push for finals football following that. They had the units there. They obviously went through a period of COVID where they had to reactively bring in players from the waffle to replace players because players were getting injured or sick, and things went really south for them over a period of years. And, injuries obviously haven't helped them out. But when you think about it, I think this is more a list management thing compared to North Melbourne. I mean, North Melbourne were given assistance packages because they were getting belted every week and they were on the bottom of the ladder. They were never near competing for finals football. They never had this top talent that, wanted to help compete for these finals. And I mean, West Coast is still getting players in. They just had Jack Graham jump from Richmond. They just had Liam Baker jump from Richmond. But you think about list management outside of that, they gave away their future to get Tim Kelly, and Tim Kelly hasn't really delivered all too much. I still feel he was a better player at Geelong. They could have split the Harley Reid pick, and I feel Harley Reid is going to leave West Coast. So in the end, they could have picked 2 kids that were going to stay there instead of picking the one that was going to move. These little decisions that they have made could have put them in a better position, but has fucked them. And to think that they've gone for a team that won a grand final to now being in a position where only 7 years later people are saying, oh, they should get assistant packages, I don't think they should. That's just my opinion. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think. But this game just ran out the way we thought it would. Carlton winning quite emphatically, and West Coast losing quite emphatically. Could this be the jumpstart that Carlton need for their season? I don't know. I predicted them to finish minor premiers and win the entire competition. I don't know whether that'll happen right now, but a boost like this could create momentum in a big way, so who fucking knows what's going to happen with this club moving forward. The Bulldogs took on Brisbane in a game that I think shell-shocked a lot of people. At half-time, to see the Bulldogs lead 62-29, a lot of people were absolutely blown away by just the lack of pressure around the contest from Brisbane. There were many players that struggled to get a touch up until half-time. Eric Hipwood, who I still feel is one of the most underrated players in the comp. He is on a contract that he does not deserve, and you can come at me for that, but I feel he hasn't delivered near enough for the Brisbane fans to justify the amount of money or the length of contract he's on. That being said, I think he tried to fucking justify it in the second half, because he went from one disposal. He had one singular kick in the first half of football. In the second half, from almost 39, 40 odd points down, and this was even at the halfway point of the third term. Eric Hipwood ends the game with 5 goals and almost single-handedly brings them back from the clutches of defeat to end up running out this game from 39 points down to 21 points up. To have a 50-point turnaround in a half of football in a game where you were pretty much non-existent in the first half is absolutely huge. And Brisbane winning this game goes on to have them remain undefeated. This is the first time ever in the history of this competition that we have seen the Gold Coast and Brisbane, after 5 rounds of football, remain the only 2 undefeated teams in the comp. That is huge for Queensland collectively, and you could probably make excuses given some of the teams that Gold Coast have played. I feel they've had an easier run than what Brisbane have had. Brisbane have had a taller order, but this just confirms why Brisbane won the grand final last year, why they're the reigning premiers, and I suppose it's also a continuation of what they've shown this year. Brisbane have been incredibly slow to kick games off, and I have said numerous times over the course of the year, Brisbane are going to run against teams that if they leave the door open too wide, teams are going to take advantage and run out to huge leads, some which might be insurmountable. But Brisbane just found a way to dig deep. Logan Morris, young kid, only a handful of games in his back pocket, comes out and kicks 3 or 4 goals this week. Obviously, Eric Hipwood kicks 5. Collectively, after that halftime period, Lachie Neale starts going absolutely fucking bananas in the midfield. Hugh McCluggage backs up a big game last week by coming into this week, having a huge game again himself. Dunkley might have been a little bit of ways off the mark, but he was still playing a role. It was just a complete turnaround. It was, again, very similar to that Thursday night game with Adelaide taking on Geelong. It was a tale of two tapes. It was the dominance of the Bulldogs in the first half versus the dominance of Brisbane in the second half. And ultimately, at the end of the day, given the circumstances, you have to be, especially as a neutral, more impressed with the comeback from Brisbane compared to the lead that the Bulldogs took, because the Bulldogs lead that they had becomes less impressive given the fact that they fumbled the fuck out of it. And I don't know whether you sum that up to the fact that Sam Darcy has now had to take on a bigger load because there's no Jamara Ugle-Hagan. Aaron Norton, obviously, is used to being second in command in the forward line. He now needs to play that number 1 role. James Harmes goes down within the opening moments with a foot injury, which is easier replaced than what people think, because Beveridge has already come out saying coming into the next round, Marcus Bontempelli is returning, and they're going to be returning against, I don't think it's North Melbourne, because it could be North versus Carlton, but he's coming back in, and it's just a straight swap. Harmes goes out, Bont comes back in. I don't know whether Bont is going to automatically fix problems. Obviously, Treloar's still out injured as well, but I don't know what happened with this drop-off. Bulldogs just looked in the zone, and I thought they're going to come out in the second half, they're going to put the foot down on the throat, they're going to go in for the kill, and it was completely the opposite way. Brisbane just started running with momentum, and so much so that Eric Hipwood was able to run into open goals and slot goals on the run. It's not something he does in his repertoire, but the Bulldogs allowed it to happen. This was a comprehensive beating in that second half, and kind of confirms to myself deep down that Brisbane might actually go back-to-back this year, given when they're on, they look almost undefeatable, and that is huge, given that for years I was saying Brisbane have to win a premiership. They've got the team to do it. If they don't win it now, when are they going to win it? They win it last year after being defeated the year prior, and I think they've got themselves in a sweet spot now. They've got belief about them. These young kids coming through, like a Logan Morris, like a Levi Ashcroft, Will Ashcroft taking his game to the next level. They could go back-to-back. Very scary concept, considering that these guys are going to be together for a few more years to come. So Brisbane could capitalise, and they could become the next dynasty team. I don't have no doubt about that whatsoever. While the Bulldogs may have been down, the woes for Melbourne continue, starting their season 0-5 after being beaten by Essendon again, quite convincingly. And I mentioned it over on Twitter, and a couple of people have gotten behind that comment and agreed with me. Some Melbourne fans don't understand where this drop-off has come from, but you have to look comprehensively over the last 12 months to understand where this has come from. You had Christian Petrarca injured on field, treated incredibly poorly by the Melbourne medical staff, and in a position where he was looking around to be shipped off in a trade. His body language this year has shown that he doesn't want to be at this club anymore. He might have recommitted at the start of the year, but I don't think that commitment's going to be seen through. Clayton Oliver has come off a pre-season from hell, linked to a lot of behavioural issues. We know, I think a lot of us know deep down, there are some drug issues going on as well that were kind of swept under the rug. I still feel they scapegoated Joel Smith to save Clayton Oliver's ass, and I think that's fucking bullshit that they did that. Max Gawn was only thrown under the bus a couple of weeks back by the coach as a potential reason as to why they lost, because Max Gawn's head wasn't in the game. I think they've run their course with Simon Goodwin, and some of the media experts are trying to say Simon Goodwin's a good coach because he has won a premiership. What the fuck have they done since? This was a team that was touted to be the next dynasty after Richmond. This was a team that when they won that grand final, people were saying, have a look at how good these guys look. This is going to be the next, back-to-back three-peat style team. And they have just dropped off the face of the earth, and they are just a shadow of their former selves. It is ugly to look at, and you can poke holes. They have a dysfunctional forward line. They've got players like Bailey Fritsch, who is an incredibly selfish footballer. Anywhere near 50, if he's got the ball, he'd rather have a ping than pass it off to a teammate. I think that's bullshit. I think that by the end of the year, we're going to see multiple things happen. I don't think Simon Goodwin's going to be coach, and if they want to take themselves seriously, they do need to find a new one. I don't think Cozzy Pickett will be there anymore. He's 100% gone to Fremantle. I feel Clayton Oliver's going to be at Geelong. Christian Petrarca is going to be at Collingwood. If all of those come true, I'm happy to come back to this video and re-highlight it. But they're just... I don't know where their first win's going to come from. How they're playing, I honestly think a team like Richmond is going to roll up against them and get a win. West Coast could potentially pick up a win. That is how much of this drop-off has affected this club. There's definitely inner turmoil going on. I can feel there's something more than what they're... And, you know, they probably don't have to be transparent with what's happening behind closed doors. But there's shit going down. I can feel it. On the flip side, Essendon might not have had the start to the season that they wanted, but they got another win on the board, and it done so collectively again through the young talent they've got going through some recruits that they've had, positional changes moving around the ground. Zach Merritt's played more forward this year than he ever has, I feel. Will Setterfield has come back in and found his spot in the midfield as a tagger, and he ran a good job against Clayton Oliver in this game. Shutting Clayton Oliver down is not a tall order given the circumstances of fitness and everything else. I think it's easier to do now than it would have been in the past. But shutting down someone that's a huge accumulator and someone that they turn to at Melbourne, huge, huge, huge. I feel Will Settlefield's job on Clayton Oliver set Essendon up for a win. Jai Menzie pops up and kicks 4 goals. You know, Zach Merritt, even though he spent time up forward, ultimately I feel was best on ground. Defensively, they were great. Ridley was such a stalwart back there. He was... I'm stumbling again, I apologise. But he was doing a great job. You know, young kids like Reed coming through that defensive structure, looking really good. Very, very much so shrouded, I feel, this win in a lot of darkness because Nick Bryan went down with an ACL, so he's going to miss at least 12 months of football, which is a shame because he was actually playing really well. Does this mean Draper has to be the number 1 ruck at Essendon? Does Todd Goldstein now come back into circulation? Because let's not forget, he is still there at Essendon. I sometimes forget that fact myself. But they're finding ways to kick scores. I honestly thought they would struggle up forward without Jake Stringer, because Jake Stringer has been that number 1 man for them for so long. They go and draft Peter Wright. He's still out injured, you know, so I thought, what's going to happen here? Who's going to kick goals? They can't rely on Langford, and they haven't been able to because Langford's been out injured. But they keep finding ways. They turn Nick Martin into a forward, and he hits the scoreboard. Kids like Menzie pop up and kick 4. Essendon won this game very convincingly, and as a neutral supporter, I actually really enjoyed watching Essendon get up and about. Richmond taking on Fremantle. A bit of a grudge match given that Shea Bolton went over to Fremantle. It's the first time he's playing against his old club. The narrative is already going to be run. You know, we've already seen that narrative kind of in the practice game against West Coast. It's going to happen again when it's going to be, you know, Jack Graham and Liam Baker, name escaped me for a second then, but when they play against their clubs for the first time, you know, this coming week, Gold Coast take on Richmond, so it's going to be Damien Hardwick versus Richmond, and the tail of the tape, you know what I mean. But this game I came into with a lot of confidence because I felt after the effort that we put in against Brisbane the week prior, they could really challenge Fremantle here. And up until quarter time, halftime even, Richmond were well in the game. We were only 10 points behind the mark at halftime after being behind by the 2 points at quarter time. And unfortunately, as I think many Richmond supporters would expect, and even neutral supporters at this point in time, there was a halftime drop-off and Fremantle came out and absolutely dominated. Richmond only managed to kick 1 goal for the entire second half, which I feel is inexcusable. But when we're in the position we're in, a lot of young kids, majority of which haven't even reached 50 games, some of which haven't even played 10 games yet, coming up against a team that is real seasoned, you know, their senior players like Brayshaw and Sarong managed to get off the chain. Sean Darcy comes in for his first game and just looked comfortable. Liam Ryan and Jordan Clark in defence looked great. Shea Bolton actually played a really good game. Josh Tracy kicked 6. It was a very comprehensive, you know, second half from Fremantle. They put Richmond to the sword and really didn't give them much breathing room. That wasn't without saying Richmond didn't have players that didn't stand tall. Nathan Broad and Nick Vlaston in defence this year have been huge, and when they retire, I feel that is going to be my saddest point since seeing the likes of Cochin and Rewalt and Dustin Martin leave, because they're really holding that back six together, and without those 2 players in there, I shudder to think how Richmond are going to perform. Obviously, heading into this game, Sam Lawler out with a hip injury. Harry Armstrong with a hamstring niggle, which we thought he might only miss a couple of weeks. It's now been revealed he's going to miss up to 12 weeks, maybe more. So that could even put a strike through his season at this point in time. Who knows? Jonty Fall comes in for debut. Looked impressive in moments. He's going to find his feet. It's going to take a little bit of time. But there's still a lot of upside for Richmond. I mean, Luke Traynor looks absolutely fucking fantastic. He's going to be a hell of a player. I'm glad that we got him as late as we did. Josh Smiley's lighting it up in the VFL. I'm expecting him to get a debut against the Gold Coast this coming week. Once Taj Houghton comes off of his ACL and he's back in circulation, he was touted to be a top 5 pick before he did his ACL. The fact that we picked him up at pick 13 could be the steal of the draft. So I'm keen to see these young kids get opportunity. That's all it is for me. That, and I want to see competitiveness, and it was a little bit upsetting as a Richmond supporter this week to see them play so incredibly well against Brisbane and then have that halftime deficit against Fremantle this week. It's just, I feel there's going to be a lot of inconsistencies that we need to ride. There should never be panic stations this year for Richmond, I feel. We knew, a lot of people even said that Richmond wouldn't win a game this year. So the fact that we beat Carlton and have that win, we were competitive against the reigning premiers. The kids are getting game time. The kids are looking impressive. There's a lot to hang our hats on. But there's still going to be inconsistencies that we need to ride. And we can still be upset about it. But ultimately, it was going to be the year that we're going to have. This rebuild's going to take a bit of time. But once we hit our strides, we're going to be back. I can feel it. Once it's time, it'll be fucking time. Fremantle's win puts them back in top 8 calculations, which obviously I did have them playing finals this year. It's just a consistency thing for these guys as well. We've seen them play really good football. At their best, they can compete against the best. Unfortunately, they pick and choose when that best is coming. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go moving forward. But Fremantle getting a comprehensive win. Richmond sent back down to reality a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see the trajectory these teams go on moving forward. Couple of talking points out of this game. One was with Patrick Voss swinging a fist into Nick Vlosten. Some would argue that he was trying to contest the ball, but the fact that he's hit Nick Vlosten flush and there was just blood pissing out everywhere, going to be interesting to see what the tribunal do, because we know the AFL tribunal like to act on outcome instead of the impact of the actual hit. We saw Rory Lobb earlier this year try to spoil the ball and punch Dean Cox, but it was Mason Cox clean in the face, split him open, give him a black eye. He got away with nothing. But precedent has been set this year that if you make contact with the head, you need to get suspended for it. So is Patrick Voss in trouble? I don't know, given that it's against Richmond. Probably not. If it was Tom Lynch that swung a fist, he'd probably be looking at 4 weeks. The other big issue that people are talking about is they feel Jaden Short is going to get suspended for contact with an umpire. When I look at this incident in isolation, and I do this as a Richmond supporter trying to take bias out of the way, the umpire moves one way, and you can see Jaden Short kind of running in the direction that the umpire moved into, and then Jaden Short tries to pivot around, and at the same time the umpire decides to move back. So I feel they're probably as at fault as each other. He'll probably end up getting fined for it, which I think is bullshit, given that I think that the umpire got in the way of Jaden Short in the first place. But I don't think he'll be suspended. A lot of people are saying, oh, he's going to be in big trouble. I don't think so. But hey, again, it's Richmond. We've been made example of twice already this year. Wouldn't be surprised if Jaden Short ends up getting suspended for it. Watch this space. St Kilda versus GWS. 2 teams coming into this game that, coming in retrospectively with big wins in Adelaide. Obviously, in the past, we've seen GWS perform well down there, and collectively this year have been one of the better teams in the comp. St Kilda coming off of a very impressive win only the week prior at Adelaide Oval against Port Adelaide. So taking in a little bit of home ground advantage, home field kind of play going on here, given the circumstances. And St Kilda, I don't think at any point looked like they were going to win this game after quarter time. At quarter time, only being 2 points behind, they looked well in it, and I thought we were going to be in for a grandstand finish. But by 3/4 time, when the scoreboard reads 55 to 105, 50 points difference, there has to be something. I don't think GWS could have even got on the bus and gone back to fucking New South Wales and given St Kilda enough time to hit the scoreboard to win. St Kilda only went on to finish on 82 for the game, so they managed to advance in the second, portion of that half, the last quarter, by 4 goals. But GWS collectively come out And they left the door open, GWS. They fucked around and they could have found out, because GWS only managed to kick 5 behinds for that last term. They did all the damage in that third quarter, and it just was too insurmountable of a task for St Kilda to come back from. This could have been a complete horror story. If St Kilda had come back from 50 points down to win this game, it would have been one of the best comebacks I've seen in recent years. It would have been one of the best finishes we have seen in recent years. GWS left the door wide fucking open for that to happen. Thankfully it didn't, because GWS, I feel, shouldn't have won this game, because they looked infinitely better for the largest amount of game time. They looked so comprehensive. That orange tsunami that they've got going is just so incredibly well done, and it pains me to my core that Richmond let Adam Kingsley leave. Adam Kingsley, I feel, should have been the heir apparent to Damien Hardwick. We would still have this orange tsunami being a yellow and black tsunami, because let's not mince words, Adam Kingsley, where the fuck I get Aaron from? Adam Kingsley went and took Richmond's mould of the run and carry from defensive 50 to forward 50, took it to GWS and perfected it even more. And that's where this orange tsunami came from. It's the game style that Kingsley developed under Hardwick. It breaks my fucking heart. But GWS looking the goods. If there is any team outside of Victoria that I would love to see win a premiership this year, I'm all behind GWS winning their first, because they finally get recognition for all the hard work they've been putting in after obviously that demoralising defeat in that 2019 grand final against my boys. They've been building since then. They've been recruiting incredibly well. They've been trading out and turning those trades into young kids that have come in to fill roles. They look impressive. They have been one of the better looking teams all year. Prelim final, I think, is almost a guarantee for GWS this year. If they can take that next step and go into the grand final, I feel they could just about pinch it. There were some players I was surprised that didn't get off the chain as much as they did. I mean, Jesse Hogan coming off of kicking 9 against West Coast, I thought he would have put in a bigger performance in this game, but that just speaks volumes, I feel, to how well of a lockdown defender Callum Wilkie truly is. I feel he doesn't get spoken about enough. Another player I feel that hasn't been spoken enough in retrospect to media is Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira. I know they've mentioned things like, should they focus more on locking him down than picking up someone like a Finn Callaghan or a Tom De Koning, you know, these players that they're linked to. I feel Wanganeen-Malira has to be priority here. They need to lock him down. A half-back defender kicking 3 goals and almost single-handedly trying to wrestle momentum in the game back off his own boot is huge. They still lost rather convincingly at the end of the day, but I feel best on ground for St Kilda was easily Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira. I feel he might even get into calculation for Brownlow votes in this game because of how well he played, even though he was in a losing outfit. You know, Jack Sinclair still did his role. There were other role players that still managed to do their roles. It's just collectively they're struggling to find a way. I think Max King not being in their forward line is being detrimental to them moving forward, because at least he provides a contest. I don't know where St Kilda are at, because one week they come out and absolutely flog a team. Last week they looked almost untouchable to Port Adelaide, and then come out after playing a decent quarter against GWS and then laid down and took it. I mean, they only came back in that final term because GWS weren't able to convert their own ball movement moving forward. I don't think it's alarm bells for St Kilda, but a lot of questions need to be asked, because there's just so much inconsistency in their games that I think Ross Lyon would be ripping paint off of those walls, especially with outcomes like this when the door is left wide open and they struggle to even get near the doorknob. The round ended with Port Adelaide taking on Hawthorn. Hawthorn coming into this game undefeated, touted as the premiership favourites, and never looked like they were getting anywhere near this win. I feel it was almost the humbling defeat they needed, and in saying that, this game was still incredible to watch because it had a lot of old school biff about it. There were spot fires going on, there was a lot of intensity in this game, hard hits. This is football that people love to watch, but Port Adelaide never looked like they were going to lose this game. Even, you know, to think that Hawthorn, who have been so potent at hitting the scoreboard, only managed to kick 1 goal in the first quarter. They only managed to kick a further 2 goals heading into half-time, and for the rest of the game, okay, they piled 11 goals on after that, but after half-time, Port Adelaide slowed down a little bit. So it was only, again, similar to the game prior, Port Adelaide slowing down and taking their foot off the gas allowed Hawthorn to come back in. But Port Adelaide going, pedal to the metal, hell for leather in that first half, set them up to in a position where they were never going to lose. I mean, the halftime differential was 79-20. They were looking like they were going to break, that 100-point gap early in the third term. Hawthorn managed to find a way to stem the flow a little bit. They managed to put themselves in a position where they won that quarter. In the last term, Hawthorn did get themselves close enough to maybe being within 4 goals, and I don't think there was enough time on the clock to really get back, maybe 6 minutes at that point in time, but Hawthorn started to find momentum. But again, that was because Port Adelaide took their foot off the gas and allowed Hawthorn to get back. So it's going to be interesting because, again, Hawthorn, have they really been tested up until this point in time? They had an early bye, which allowed them a bit of a break. Coming into this week, they were coming off of the bye, so maybe it was to their detriment that they had a week off. Maybe that momentum dropped a little bit, and Port Adelaide, with the chip on their shoulder, losing to St Kilda the week prior at home, needed to prove something here. And obviously this was shrouded in controversy because of the Ken Hinkley versus James Sicily stoush that happened at the end of last year's game in the finals and everything else. It was always going to be hot, and there were going to be people going in on contests, and they were going to be going for the throat. I mean, there was a moment where Zach Butters dropped a fucking Macho Man Randy Savage elbow into somebody's back. I don't know whether he's going to be fined for that. If he gets suspended, I'd be surprised. But it was an interesting game. Very interesting, because I loved the physicality of it all, but Port Adelaide just looked incredibly good. And this is what I think pisses Port Adelaide fans off so much. They have talent on their list to look and play so incredibly well, but fail to deliver when it counts. And I don't think this win against Hawthorn is enough to save Ken Hinkley's job. I still personally feel they should have Josh Carr taking the reins now, transitioning into next year. Let him have a crack. Let him throw magnets around. Let him see what Port Adelaide can do. Interesting watch for Port to see how they go moving forward. I think this is a loss Hawthorn needed. Could very well catalyst them back into a position where they're going to go on an undefeated streak again. It's not going to rattle them too much. This is at a point where you would rather a team lose early than late. This is at a time where Hawthorn might have been getting a little bit too ahead of themselves, and they've been humbled, brought back to reality. Could be the loss that sets them up to become an absolute juggernaut. So while Port Adelaide won and took the 4 points, they could have done the rest of the competition a disservice by doing so. So it's going to be very interesting to see how both of these teams fare. Both in different positions collectively on the ladder right now, both fighting for the same thing, but one of them's obviously touted as the premiership favourite coming into the year. So I think the more interesting watch is how Hawthorn respond from this loss, but it's going to be interesting to see how Port Adelaide follow up this win, because we've seen them this year. Port Adelaide, they beat Richmond, then they go and lose to St Kilda, then they beat Hawthorn. History would say they lose next week. So it's just this inconsistency that is letting Port Adelaide down. I think Hawthorn are still better situated comparatively to Port, but anything could happen. At the end of round 5, this is how our ladder shapes up heading into round 6, and there has been a fair bit of movement collectively. Sitting undefeated in first place is Brisbane, with Gold Coast trailing undefeated as well in second. However, have played less games than the teams surrounding them. So it's going to be interesting to see. Again, this early bye structure has completely fucked this ladder up completely, because you can see Brisbane has played 5, GWS has played 5, Collingwood has played 5. Actually, every other team in that top 8, every other team in the league has played 5 games, because this Essendon Gold Coast game that got postponed in round 0 isn't going to be played until the end of the year, and could be a bearer on finals. It's going to be a very interesting watch. But Brisbane in first, Gold Coast in second, GWS moves up to third, Collingwood moves up to fourth. That is our top 4. Hawthorn have moved down to 5th, Geelong have shifted into 6th, Adelaide have moved down to 7th, and Fremantle have moved into 8th. Bear in mind, Collingwood, GWS, and Hawthorn are all collectively tied for second place. And we have St Kilda in 9th, but St Kilda, Fremantle, Adelaide, and Geelong all effectively tied for 6th. We have Sydney then moving down into 10th place. Port Adelaide have shifted into 11th. The Bulldogs have dropped to 12th. Essendon and Carlton have moved up to 13th and 14th respectively, with North Melbourne dropping to 15th, Richmond dropping to 16th, and the 2 teams still in the competition to win a game, sees Melbourne in 17th and West Coast in 18th. With the business side of things and formalities out of the way, we can now dive into a little bit of fun. We turn our attention to the 2025 MVP Awards, as well as announcing my team of the week for round 5, both of which were a little bit hard to comprehensively piece together because so many players in some games were around the mark for votes, and even then with the team of the week, so many players in certain positions could have been selected. So I'm going to upset some people this week. I can feel it deep in my loins. But again, this is all completely objective and subjective to my own decisions. So if you don't agree, if you do agree, let's have a conversation about it in the comments down below. But turning our attention to the 2025 MVP Award votes for round 5, if you are unfamiliar with how I do this, and this might be the first video you were catching here on my channel, I do it as a Brownlow system. 3, 2, 1. Quite simple. Best on ground gets 3. The third best gets 1. And I'm not necessarily doing it as players that get the most touches, kick the most goals. I'm doing it based off, I think, of the players that have had most influence given their position in the game. So some players might only have 15, 16, 17 touches compared to someone who's had 30, but I feel has been more influential with how they have used the ball. Does that make sense? I hope so. Kicking it off with the first game of the round, Adelaide taking on Geelong. 1 vote, Adelaide, Isaac Rankin. 25 disposals, 16 kicks, 9 handballs, 5 marks, 4 tackles, 4 clearances, 273 metres gained, 2 goals, and 10 score involvements. 2 votes, Geelong, Bailey Smith. 35 disposals, 24 kicks, 11 handballs, 1 mark, 1 tackle, 6 clearances, 643 metres gained, 1 goal, and 9 score involvements. With 3 votes going to Geelong, Max Holmes. 32 disposals, 22 kicks, 10 handballs, 6 marks, 7 tackles, 5 clearances, 805 metres gained, 1 goal, and 6 score involvements. Collingwood versus Sydney. 1 vote, Collingwood, Steele Sidebottom. 28 disposals, 17 kicks, 11 handballs, 5 marks, 6 tackles, 3 clearances, 557 metres gained, and 13 score involvements. 2 votes, Collingwood, Ned Long. 29 disposals, 13 kicks, 16 handballs, 4 marks, 6 tackles, 9 clearances, 515 metres gained, and 10 score involvements. With 3 votes going to Collingwood, Nick Dacos. 34 disposals, 16 kicks, 18 handballs, 3 marks, 9 tackles, 9 clearances, 455 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. North Melbourne versus Gold Coast. 1 vote, Gold Coast, Ben King. 6 disposals, 5 kicks, 1 handball, 2 marks, 109 metres gained, but 5 goals. 2 votes, Gold Coast, Noah Anderson. 27 disposals, 16 kicks, 11 handballs, 3 marks, 4 tackles, 6 clearances, 552 metres gained, and 12 score involvements. With 3 votes going to Gold Coast's Matt Rowell. 26 disposals, 12 kicks, 14 handballs, 1 mark, 7 tackles, 11 clearances, 442 metres gained, 1 goal, and 14 score involvements. Again, players like Touk Miller could have been in circulation here, but Ben King kicking 5 in a game where it was an arm wrestle and then they skipped ahead kind of puts a bit of a differential on the buffer, and I think this year, Ben King, Noah Anderson, and Matt Rowell seem to be in conversation every time Gold Coast win, and they've won every game. So to have these 3 constantly popping up in their best just shows how much of a step these players have taken and how much of a role they're playing in Gold Coast's current success. Carlton versus West Coast. 1 vote, Carlton, Patrick Cripps. 23 disposals, 11 kicks, 12 handballs, 3 marks, 6 clearances, 357 metres gained, 3 goals, and 13 score involvements. 2 votes, Carlton, Sam Walsh. 37 disposals, 13 kicks, 24 handballs, 6 marks, 1 tackle, 5 clearances, 422 metres gained, 3 goals, and 13 score involvements. With 3 votes going to Carlton's George Hewitt. 39 disposals, 17 kicks, 22 handballs, 8 marks, 1 tackle, 8 clearances, 440 metres gained, and 14 score involvements. Western Bulldogs versus Brisbane. 1 vote, Western Bulldogs, Ed Richards. 29 disposals, 16 kicks and 13 handballs, 4 marks, 3 tackles, 8 clearances, 525 metres gained, and 13 score involvements. 2 votes, Brisbane, Eric Hipwood. 12 disposals, 11 kicks, 1 handball, 5 marks, 2 tackles, 402 metres gained, 5 goals, and 10 score involvements, with 3 votes going to Brisbane's Hugh McCluggage. 32 disposals, 15 kicks, 17 handballs, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 6 clearances, 489 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. Melbourne versus Essendon. 1 vote, Essendon, Jai Menzie. 15 disposals, 13 kicks, 2 handballs, 8 marks, 1 tackle, 353 metres gained, 4 goals, and 8 score involvements. 2 votes, Essendon, Will Setterfield. 21 disposals, 13 kicks, 8 handballs, 3 marks, 10 tackles, 2 clearances, 355 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. 3 votes, Essendon, Zach Merritt. 37 disposals, 15 kicks, 22 handballs, 8 marks, 5 tackles, 2 clearances, 342 metres gained, and 9 score involvements. Richmond versus Fremantle. 1 vote, Fremantle, Caleb Sarong. 29 disposals, 17 kicks, 12 handballs, 4 marks, 4 tackles, 6 clearances, 461 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. 2 votes, Fremantle, Josh Tracy. 11 disposals, 10 kicks, 1 handball, 8 marks, 3 tackles, 278 metres gained, 6 goals, and 9 score involvements. 3 votes, Fremantle, Andrew Brayshaw. 31 disposals, 12 kicks, 19 handballs, 2 marks, 10 tackles, 6 clearances, 517 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. St Kilda versus GWS. 1 vote, St Kilda, Nasiah Wanganeen Malira. 24 disposals, 17 kicks, 7 handballs, 2 marks, 3 tackles, 2 clearances, 673 metres gained, 3 goals, and 7 score involvements. 2 votes, GWS, Lockie Ash. 33 disposals, 19 kicks, 14 handballs, 9 marks, 1 tackle, 1 clearance, 463 metres gained, and 4 score involvements. 3 votes, GWS, Toby Green. 17 disposals, 15 kicks, 2 handballs, 6 marks, 2 tackles, 3 clearances, 576 metres gained, 5 goals, and 8 score involvements. The final game of the round, Port Adelaide versus Hawthorn. 1 vote, Port Adelaide, Joe Richards. 16 disposals, 9 kicks, 7 handballs, 3 marks, 3 tackles, 1 clearance, 240 metres gained, 2 goals, and 5 score involvements. 2 votes, Port Adelaide, Connor Rozee. 28 disposals, 20 kicks, 8 handballs, 7 marks, 4 tackles, 3 clearances, 546 metres gained, 2 goals, and 5 score involvements. And 3 votes, Port Adelaide, Zach Butters. 33 disposals, 14 kicks, 19 handballs, 5 marks, 4 tackles, 8 clearances, 422 metres gained, and 11 score involvements. And this is how the leaderboard overall looks after 5 rounds of AFL action. Collectively tied for 3rd place in 6 votes, we have Dane Zorko and Lockie Neal from Brisbane, Jack McRae from St Kilda, Toby Green from GWS, Andrew Brayshaw from Fremantle, Hugh McCluggage from Brisbane, Isaac Rankin from Adelaide, and Bailey Smith from Geelong. In 2nd place, tied on 7 votes, we have Jordan Dawson from Adelaide, Connor Rozee from Port Adelaide, Caleb Sarong from Fremantle, Zach Merritt from Essendon, and Noah Anderson from the Gold Coast. And in 1st place, tied on 8 votes, we have Gold Coast's Matt Rowell and Collingwood's Nick Dacos. And with the votes done, there is only one thing to do before we can officially recap the round, and that is to announce my round 5 team of the week. Again, a couple of players missing out that could have made the team, but I think the team that I've put together comprehensively speaks for itself. In defence, I have Lockie Ash and Callum Wilkie in the back pockets, with Sam Taylor out of full back, with Nasiah Wanganeen Malira and Max Holmes off of the half-back flanks, and Harris Andrews at centre-half back. Across my centre line, I have Bailey Smith and Hugh McCluggage on the wings, with Andrew Brayshaw in the centre. Forward 50 is comprised of Toby Green and Zach Merritt off of the half-back flanks, and Ben King at centre-half forward, with Jai Menzies and Eric Hipwood in the forward pockets, and Josh Tracy playing out of full forward. Max Gawn gets the ruck role this week, with Nick Dacos and George Hewitt playing ruck rover and rover respectively. The interchange boasts names of Zach Butters, Sam Walsh, Isaac Rankin, and Matt Rowell. Ned Long is announced as sub of the week. Even though he's not the sub, something I'm doing is if I can't fit somebody in the team, I'm making them sub. Again, I don't know whether this should be a sub picked, but that's not how I'm doing it. And coach of the week, after being almost 40 points down and then turning it around in a 50-point complete turn, 360, whatever you want to call it, Chris Fagan is announced as my coach of the week. And that is it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. The round has officially been recapped. I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to check this out. I love piecing this together, but it does take a hell of a long fucking time to do so. So I would appreciate it if you hit that like button, shared the video around, and even if you wanted to get on board the community we are building here, consider hitting that subscribe button as well. It would mean a lot to me if you did. But that is it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.